Hi, and welcome to Dollars and Making Sense, a weekly show about finance, money, and investing. I'm your host, Ray Treverson from OTG Capital. We broadcast locally on Radio Northern Beaches and around Australia on the Community Radio Network, also through Spotify, iHeartRadio, and a whole range of different blogs and podcasts that we get picked up on. I'm really pleased to welcome back to the microphone today Ian McLeod. He's from an organisation called RP Emery Legal Kits, and I'm reading from my screen there, so I apologise for looking away, but my memory's not so great these days. Now, for those of you that follow our show, Ian's been on the show before. Now, Ian, welcome to the show, firstly.
Thank you, Ray. Glad to be back.
Now, last time you were with us, we were talking about financial agreements and also prenuptials. Now, prenuptials is one of those interesting things we see a lot about in Hollywood movies, but to actually have it discussed in an Australian setting, I was really pleasantly surprised by how many hits we got and how many views. Is that something that surprises you, or that's what you expected?
Look, I don't know what to expect as far as hits and views go, but yeah, like there's people, who are constantly worried about protecting, wealth that they bring into a relationship, particularly those who are in subsequent relationships. So parties who, couples who might have been through a previous divorce. She just managed to retain the house and a little bit of wealth, and he's worried about his super or whatever the case may be, right? So it's more common for us for couples who have been through the mill once before and don't ever want to go through it again.
It's fascinating to me. I mean, I used to be a financial advisor before I started my own investment fund, and people, and I'm ex-Army alumni, so I occasionally old Army buddies, and they ask me, any pearls of wisdom, and I said, well, your biggest money destroying event that you'll ever have in your life is divorce. And they went, what do you mean? I said, every time you do it, you're halving your wealth. So it's the kind of thing that try and avoid at all costs. I mean, not everyone's made for everyone else. That you can't always be assured of 100% of marriage, but I think one of the things that, talking with you last year, and I wanted you to be coming back on the show, is that being able to preempt and I think laid down the groundwork. And as you say, people that have been through the mill before, I think had that experience. And I guess what I wanted to talk about today was the follow-up to these agreements, and again, maybe get some pearls of wisdom from you. And one of the things that we're getting a lot of interest now through consumer advocacy groups and also, I guess, the regulator is property in superannuation. Now, when you're talking about couples, this is interesting. And one of the things there that can you transfer? So one of the questions we got was, can you transfer superannuation as part of a property settlement, and how does this work? So over to you, Dan.
Yeah, certainly superannuation forms part of the property pool, and if you can hold your superannuation either in like a retail fund or an industry fund, or, as you know, it could be in a self-managed super fund, right? But either way, you can transfer superannuation from one party to the other. However, there are rules about how that can be done. The only way you can transfer superannuation from one party to the other is either through a court order, so an order made through the court from a property settlement, or through a binding financial agreement. They're the two options. So if you don't have either of those, then you can't do it. Essentially, the trustees of the super fund need either of those two, either an order from the court that says party A should transfer X amount to party B, or a binding financial agreement which provides the same instruction.
So I guess it's a curiosity, because I've had a number of estate planners on the show. I also have subject matter experts from the Institute of Financial Professionals, who are the old Taxpayers Association. And so the splitting of assets and also the consideration of superannuation, a lot of people get mixed up. Super is part of an estate, but it doesn't get covered by a will. And so there's a little bit of confusion there. So when it comes to super and couples splitting up and divorcing, what kind of intricacies are you finding when you are settling out these financial agreements? What kind of things are you, I guess, trying to put to bed when you first go down this path of discussion with a divorcing couple and there's super involved?
I suppose the purpose of a binding financial agreement is to draw a line in the sand to say, all right, well, this is your portion of the property pool and this is mine. All right. So that's the aim at the end of things, not to have any ongoing financial relationship. So in relation to superannuation, the parties are either going to transfer some super from one party to the other, or each party is going to keep their own. All right, and you can balance up. Like let's say one party has a larger amount in super than the other. You can do either transfer part of one party's interest to the other. So when you're splitting super, you can either transfer X amount of dollars from one partner to the other, or you can transfer that wealth in some other way, right? So you could say, well, one party keeps their superannuation, both parties keep their respective balances, but you can adjust the inequity in those superannuation balances by, say, transfer of property from one party to the other with a catch payment. So you can juggle, you can
Sure.
move things around. You do not, if you've got an inequality in your super balances, it is not compulsory to do a super split or to transfer from one partner to the other, if that makes sense.
Oh, absolutely. And that's quite common because mostly men have more in their super balance than women because women stop work to have kids. They don't earn as much just simply through the inequity and the patriarchy. There's a whole range of reasons why that's occurring. Now, I'm going to throw a bit of a grenade into the discussion because we've had a lot of people come on the show in recent times talking about Div 296 and the balance caps and the potential for taxing of unearned gains, and people getting all up in arms, particularly the farming lobby, because a lot of people have piped up and said, well, hang on, I've got my farm sitting in my super fund. Now, why they would do that in the first instance, I'm scratching my head because super was never, ever designed to do that. We can talk about that another time. So if we've now got a rural property involved and it's big and it's chunky, and let's say it's been in a family for a number of generations and we've got a divorce, that's a bit of a grenade, isn't it?
Oh God, yeah. And it's not the type of arrangement that we would normally get involved with. That's a very specialized area of family law. If you've got to divvy up a property of or a superannuation fund where it holds the family farm as an asset, that's huge. And I'm sorry to say, it's outside the realm of what we would normally do.
Are you saying run for the hills?
Yeah, it's just very complex. So what most of the matters we deal with are relatively straightforward. We're not talking about property pools where you've got tens of millions of dollars. We have dealt with those sort of matters in the past, but for the fixed fee that we apply for the matters that we deal with. There's only so much the lawyers can do for that.
Sure.
For that fixed fee.
I guess, Ian, it lends the old idiom of prevention is better than the cure. And so I'm curious, because we did such a big show on prenuptials last year, and again, to our rural listeners, this is something that I guess is a very sage piece of advice then, that may apply to people out there, is that if you are the holder of a long time family property and you are just about to head down a wedding process, having a prenuptial, I think, would be really, very, very important, don't you think?
Absolutely. And let me say that, when you first broached that question, I immediately thought about separation and trying to unpick the issues that you might come across when you've got property inside a superannuation fund.
Mm-hmm.
However, if you're talking about protecting property that's within a superannuation fund, a family farm, or whatever, that's not so complex. If you're talking about protecting it through a prenuptial binding financial agreement made before a wedding, that's far easier to do, because it's an asset of the self-managed super fund, and you can simply say, well, that self-managed super fund is quarantined from any future claim. And so long as the parties are both open and honest with each other about the value of that fund and the makeup of that fund, then it's relatively straightforward to say that superannuation fund is treated as separate property.
Yeah, one would hope that when people are divorcing and separating, that they are frank and truthful and honest. But I guess that Coen Brothers movie, Intolerable Cruelty, with Clooney and Catherine Zeta-Jones, always comes to mind, that there's devious ways and means. But look, we're about half time here on Dollars and Making Sense, a weekly show about finance, money and investing. I'm really pleased to have at the microphone Ian McLeod, who is a principal at RP Emery Legal Kits. We are talking about binding financial agreements, prenuptials, and a whole range of different things to do with couples and money. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be back with you in just a moment. Hi, and thank you for listening to Dollars and Making Sense, a weekly radio program about finance, money and investing on Radio Northern Beaches and nationally on the Community Radio Network around Australia. The views, comments and opinions aired during our program should not be construed or viewed as financial advice. Any commentary is general advice only and does not take into account your objectives, financial situation or needs. You should consider whether the advice is suitable for you and your personal circumstances. If in doubt, you should contact an authorised licensed financial planner. We welcome questions and feedback, and you can get in touch with us via our blog, social media channels or email. Please search for Dollars and Making Sense in your favourite podcast platform, or check out our blog at otgcapital.com.au/blog. Hi, and welcome back to Dollars and Making Sense, a weekly show about finance, money and investing. I'm your host, Ray Treverson. I'm really pleased to have at the microphone this week Ian McLeod, who is a subject matter expert and principal at RP Emery Legal Kits. And we are talking about today financial agreements, prenuptials, and the kind of arrangements that couples may bring into effect before they get together and marry or cohabitate, or if they've decided that they're no longer going to be together, they're now splitting and divorcing. And so before we went to the break, we were talking very quickly about Intolerable Cruelty, the wonderful Coen Brothers movie, and how devious and deceptive divorce lawyers and the like can be. But I still believe the old idiom of prevention is better than the cure. And so when you are, in what you do day to day, do you ever sit down and actually provide advice and have a bit of a chin wag with people that are looking to form these agreements?
I certainly have a chin wag, but I have to preface everything I say with, don't take this as legal advice, because I'm not a legal advisor. I'm not a financial advisor. We are a legal publishing service. We're not a law firm. However, I have lawyers that I work with. right? So my job is essentially to help to prepare the documentation for the lawyers so they can work through this fixed fee structure that we have.
Dare I say, Ian, that you become an agony aunt then in some way or shape?
I certainly get a lot of the stories, the people 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 wanting to demonize the other party or whatever. But hopefully, that doesn't happen too often. I like to promote the idea that people who once loved each other very deeply can still get on, right? And if they can get on together within reason, still communicate, still have a degree of mutual respect for each other, then the separation process can be, you can make it so much easier. I see, and I probably went into this in the last podcast. My perception of couples when they separate, immediately they run off to a lawyer. One goes here, one goes there, and that's the accepted norm. Okay, you run off to your lawyer, and the lawyers will sort it out. And I liken it to hiring a sellsword. You want somebody to go off and slay the dragon, and because it's much easier to hide behind your lawyer and say, tell her this and tell him that, and every time you're flicking a curt email or letter to the other party, it costs you $300, maybe more. All right. And that's what really ramps up the costs in divorce. And people love to blame the lawyers for that. They love to say, the lawyers are all predatory and it's all their fault. But there's a bit of fault on both sides, right? Because
Sure.
people like to argue, or they prefer to argue through their lawyer, and so then they don't have to deal with the other party. Right?
Sure.
And if that's your choice, fine, that's your choice. But bear in mind, you will pay dearly for it.
Oh, look, I liken lawyers to management consultants when I worked in the public sector and in government businesses. That's the reason that consultants were around. They did the tedious decision making when you weren't too brave enough to do it yourself. But let's move on.
Sure.
Let's talk quickly about prenups now. When you are entering into a prenuptial type of agreement, when should that agreement be put in place?
Whenever you enter any of these binding financial agreements, so binding financial agreement is an umbrella term for an agreement made before, during, or after marriage. So if we're talking about a prenup, we're talking about a binding financial agreement made before marriage. So when the lawyers provide their legal advice, they have to advise each party of whether or not this arrangement is to your advantage or to your disadvantage. Essentially, is it a good deal for you? And generally speaking, one party who will be driving the process, they might have real estate or superannuation or savings or share portfolio or whatever, family farm that they need to protect. All right. And so there'll generally be an inequity of financial resources, and along with that comes an inequity in bargaining power. You've got one party who's reasonably strong, they've usually got a bit more, and the other party who has a bit less. All right. So the lawyers want to make sure that their client has time to consider the legal advice. It should never be rushed. It should never be, look, we've got to get this thing done before the wedding, all right, and done in a matter of days before the wedding, or even weeks before the wedding. We used to say, look, do it at least a month. If you're going to put one of these agreements in place, you would want to have it in place, signed and sealed within a month. The lawyers are starting to go, stretch it out now, and they're looking at 2 months as a minimum period. So if you're considering doing a binding financial agreement before marriage, the worst thing you can do is leave it till the last minute, right? Because if you leave it too late, you can weaken the foundation of that agreement. And the way it's done is, there can never be any inference of pressure being brought to bear to sign a binding financial agreement. Both parties must be acting of their own free will without any external pressure, coercion, what we call unconscionable conduct.
Sure.
You have to be making the decision of your own free will. And so if it could be demonstrated that you weren't, that one party was not acting of their own free will, right, then that agreement can be set aside by the court right at the time when you want to rely on it.
I guess it begs the question, you've been around the traps a long time. I mean, have you ever seen couples that come to the table all in good faith about doing a prenuptial, and then through the discussion and the terms and agreement, they end up sort of walking away and going, bugger off, I actually don't want to marry you anymore? Have you ever seen that happen?
I have. Wow. It doesn't happen very often, but I have seen it. I had one recently. It was I hope he's not. I don't think he'll be watching. I won't mention any names.
Obviously, no names. No.
But he'd gone to Vietnam, met a bride over there. All right, wanted to put the prenup in place, and they were all set to get the legal advice. She was, of course, getting her legal advice from an Australian lawyer who could deliver that advice in her native tongue, in Vietnamese, right? And he didn't even get back to Australia. Oh, wow. He came. It got halfway through the process, and the marriage was over. All right, so.
Okay.
Apparently, he was sitting in the kitchen, and she introduced her new partner, and they'd only been married for a week.
Oh wow! Okay, I must say, Ian, I love the idea. Human frailties, and I guess the way that we are as a species. The way that we learn and experience each other through storytelling. I must say, your life experience in doing what you've been doing with agreements and financial agreements and working with couples. I've recently had a lovely lady over in Kalgoorlie who does social finance counselling in Kalgoorlie with couples. Yep. And she's an absolute tapestry of wonderful stories and anecdotes. You must be the same. I mean, have you ever thought about writing a book or a script for Netflix? I mean, it must be enticing. You'd have a few good tales to tell.
Oh, look, we produce a little bit of some of our stories from time to time, but a lot of them can be very personal. So
I guess so. I mean, when I first started in this industry, I went to a wonderful conference up in the Gold Coast, and I sat and listened to an estate lawyer. And my word, he had some stories because increasingly blended families are a thing, and so. Yes. I think a very common sense approach, and I think you really hit the nail on the head, Ian, that if people look at each other and say, I really truly have loved you, you hopefully will be able to sit down around a table and work something out. So look, just in wrapping up, I guess one of the quick questions, do people still end up in court even though they've gone through the effort of doing a prenup and getting all these agreements? By the sound of things, that's a definite yes.
They can, yes.
So a key takeaway, your website, I'll just let people know it's RP Emery, RPEMERY.com.au. And there's a whole bunch of really, really good information. And I guess My word, there's a phone number as well, so people can actually pick up the phone and talk. I get on my high horse about this because I get tired. You know, customer service via email is not customer service; it's obfuscation. For my word, you know, it's really good. If you need to, people, you can call Ian up. There's a phone number on his website, and we'll put that link in the blog. Any final takeaway before we say goodbye today, Ian?
Only if you are going to put an agreement in place, either before you get married or even during a de facto relationship. Just make sure everyone's on the same page. Just make sure you're all in genuine agreement first. All right. And so long as you're in genuine agreement, and you're open and honest with each other, you know, you'll probably put this agreement in place and never have to refer to it again. That's what we hope happens. Put it in a bottom drawer and hope it rots in there.
I couldn't agree more. And I guess for those of you out there that are regional listeners and that do have family farms, you know, we were talking off in between the break, ladies and gentlemen, about the unfairness of taxing unrealized gains. You know, there's a real element of fairness that comes into this. But those of you that do have long-time family farms, I'm sure this is something that you all must be able to sit down around a table and have a good discussion about before going down that wedding aisle. So look, Ian McLeod from RP Emery Legal Kits, thank you so kindly for being on Dollars and Making Sense today. Always informative.
Hey, thank you for having me on again.